Hello and welcome back. So a lot of you tuned in to the Fantasy Puck Creators League live draft, and I've been getting a bunch of comments asking for updates in that league. Now I do post weekly updates on the Instagram just showing you how I've done in my 4 leagues and where I stand in some of those leagues, and that includes this one. But I thought I'd take a little bit of time to show you what's been going on in this league. So as you can see here, these are the standings on the right. I was number 1 somehow, despite my low point total, and we'll get to that in a minute. But I was number 1 until last week, and I got knocked off by Daily Dose Hockey, who I did lose to last week. I also lost to Data Driven Hockey, so the D teams are destroying me right now. But with that said, still a respectable 5-3, above 500. And as you can see here, there's a number of teams that are all kind of in the same section. So 5-3, a bunch of teams are 4-4, a 3-5, and then a couple 2-6 teams, but nobody's out of it yet. Everybody's still in it. It's a very competitive league. And what you see here on the left is a graph that I created, essentially taking the team stats, and you can find that on Yahoo by looking at the team stats under the league tab. And then I pulled that into Tableau, and I just created this little scatter plot. And what you're seeing on the left is a percentile rating of all the skaters categories and a percentile rating of the goalies categories. Now, this is a points league. As you can see, there's a point total over here. But just to kind of break it down and see, how teams are doing offensively versus defensively. So what you can see is the top right corner is where you want to be. You would have a really good goalie rating and a really good skater rating. So as you can see, Daily Dose is in number 1 in the league. He's got a 71 percentile, I guess, would be the way to look at it for skaters, and 61 percentile for goalies. So really strong in both categories, and that's why he's number 1. Now, what's interesting is there's 2 Apples and Ginos players in this league. This is Nate's team. He's got an incredible offense, arguably the best offense, not arguably, it is the best offense in the league, 82, but 28 in goaltending, so the worst goaltending. And we'll take a little bit of a deeper dive into some of these teams in a minute, but I have the opposite. So I've got really good goaltending, not quite as good as his skaters, but my skaters are as bad as his goaltending. So that's where I need to improve for sure. And again, we'll get into that in more detail going forward. But then you have FP Chris, who's right in this range. And there's a number of teams all in this range, with a pretty complete team, solid team, right around 50% in each. So 48.67, 49.98, right around the same, 50% range. FP Don, despite the fact that he's in 8th, he's pretty close to Chris. So there's not a lot separating those two teams. In fact, just 1 win separating those two teams. Fantasy Tipped, also, slightly below them, but still playing respectably well. And then even the last place Data Driven Hockey is not that poor, not further down. You can see Daily Dose is pretty much breaking away from the pack. You would expect that in the opposite direction if they were really bad, but they're not. This is a very competitive league, so everybody's kind of clumped into this range, except for these outliers at the top. And what was happening for me is goaltending was floating me for a couple weeks. I was, I believe, 4-0 in this league, and then I took a couple, weeks and didn't have some success. Some guys got hurt, and we'll walk through that in just a second. But let's get into some of the team metrics, and we'll break it down here. And hopefully I can pull up some of these teams as we go. So we'll start with Daily Dose. He's number 1 in the league right now. And there's his roster over on the right. So what you're seeing here, these are the percentiles for each metric that are in our league. Now, it is a points league, so there's point weighting to this, but still, really good goal production. So 76th percentile in goals, 92nd in assists and power play points. So in the entire league, his team is racking up those categories compared to other teams in the league. That's what that rating is, or that metric is. Shot percentile, still really good, 69th. 76th percentile in hits. The blocks are a little bit low, but those are not really weighted as much in this league format. Then you also have, decent goaltending. So wins above 50th percentile. Goals against is really good. Save total save percentile, not save percentage, is a little bit lower. So he seems to have good goaltending that doesn't get shelled a lot. So they're not, they're on good defensive teams. They're not giving up a ton of shots. And that's Swayman. That's the Swayman effect. Demko is facing some shots, but he's only got 2 goaltenders. So that might be the reason that you're seeing that. And then the shutouts. They do have a couple shutouts between the 2 of them. And he's got 2 of the best goaltenders in the league. So the 2 goalie strategy is the opposite of what I'm going with. I'm loading up a little bit more goaltending, but it seems to work for him because of the strength of his offense and the strength of the 2 goalies that he does have. Now, as we move to my team, we'll pull my team up on the on the right side. So you can see my offense is atrocious right now. Goals really low, power play points really low, shots are okay but not great, hits are low, and blocks are even lower. And what happened here is I have Tage Thompson currently on IR, and I did have Jack Hughes on IR for a couple weeks there. So I've basically been patching together some waiver guys to try to fill in and get me some sort of offensive production, and it hasn't been working all that well. I also had Brandon Montour on IR up until the last couple weeks. A week or two ago, he finally stepped back into the lineup. So my team has yet to reach their full potential. So once I get Tage Thompson back, you add that with Jack Hughes, who's one of the best in fantasy right now. Artemi Panarin is exploding on a nightly basis. He's 1.5 plus points per game, so he's been killing it for me. I do have Trevor Moore. There are guys on my team that can get it done, and if you look at my goaltending, I've got Georgiev and the Vegas tandem. I picked up Ranta as a streamer tonight, just trying to add some other goaltending starts in there because that is the one thing that I do have. So my wins percentile is really good. Elite level, 92nd percentile. Goals against is okay. Saves, total save volume is pretty good. And then shutouts, about mid-pack there. So nothing crazy here. I am hoping to get Tage Thompson back in the near future, and that will help my team. And I desperately need him to come back because my team is struggling right now. One thing I did want to note is I picked up Josh Norris off waivers. And if you know anything about the schedule, they have the least amount of games in the league so far at this point in the season. After December 16th, I believe, they play 57 games, which is the most in the NHL. So I'm hoping to hold on to Norris and pack in a lot of volume from some Senators. I also have CHATBOT. He just came back again, another guy that was injured. So I'm kind of battling injuries and playing just well enough to keep myself alive for the playoff push. But now let's take a look at another team. Let's look at data-driven hockey. So looking at his metrics, really good goal production, almost no assists and no power play points, getting a bunch of shots, and the hits and blocks are kind of in the middle. So you're seeing a lot of different variations of what guys we're focusing on in the draft and with their waiver pickups. And he's going for goals, and it's not necessarily working out for him in the standings, but he is still staying competitive. And then you look at the goaltending, he's got good goals against average, and right now his two goalies are Varlamov and Grubauer. I assume that he went with the zero goalie strategy and has just been streaming goalies, which is a very difficult strategy. We do, and on this channel, I like to fade goaltending, but I've basically laid out where I like to draft goalies, and you need to draft goalies in this case, in my opinion, because otherwise you're looking at the win percentile this low, save percentile this low, and you're struggling to find waiver guys every single week that'll put up consistent numbers. So you saw the number one team in this league has Demko and Swayman. Those are two really good goaltenders, and he's running two goalies instead of 3 or 4. So that seems to be a different strategy for the number one team compared to this team. But altogether, got some players here. So McCann's a goal scorer, Connor's a goal scorer, Crosby's playing pretty well. You have Matt Tkachuk, who hasn't popped off yet. You've got Pavelski in there. He can score some goals. The defense is a little bit light in terms of offensive production. Uyghur's been playing a little bit better. Pareko's more of a hitter and a blocker. Riley, Riley and Dunn are kind of in that same mushy middle of, not elite power play quarterback defensemen, but they do sometimes get that power play quarterback assignment. Then you've got Barkov. Hyman is starting to break out now that the Oilers are getting better, but all in all, I do see the reason why they're performing in the goals section, and they're not getting a ton of assists, but that's to be expected with some of these guys scoring so many goals. I would expect Crosby to get a couple more assists, but maybe not enough to carry the whole team. But now let's take a look at Dobber hockey, and I'll pull up his team on the right. Now, by the way, I don't want anyone to think that I'm critiquing other people's teams. I'm just trying to show you the difference in strategy, and the way that these teams are broken out, the way that they're constructed is different. And everybody's still really competitive. So there's a number of different ways that you can format your team and still have success. So Dobber, you can see a lot of power play points here, 76th percentile in that metric. The blocks are really good, and you can see that from he has Braden McNabb, he's got Radko Gudas, he's got Darnell Nurse. Those are all hitters and shot blockers, and you can see that those guys are performing pretty well. And then in goal, he's got really good goals against. The save percentiles are a little bit low, and then some of the other goaltending metrics are below 50th percentile. So he's got Hellebuck, he's got Kochetkov right now. I assume he picked him up relatively recently. And then he's also got Linus Ullmark. So he should have pretty good goaltending. It's just, I guess, one of those things where he probably had two really good ones and had another guy in there that was probably causing him some hardships in net and had to drop him and ended up picking up Kochetkov. And maybe that explains some of the underperformance. But those are two good goaltenders that should be able to get it done. And then in terms of the offense, Jason Robertson needs to get it going. That will definitely help this team score some more goals. They're 38th percentile right now in goals, so that would definitely help. He probably was missing Adam Fox. That's a huge power play booster when he's in the lineup, and that's why his power play numbers are so good. Pettersson is going to carry a lot of categories, although this is a points league. We know that. But Pettersson is always putting up goals, power play points, etc. He does have Keller, who gets some power play points as well. So a number of guys who are on their first power play unit. Scheifele, Barbashev at times has been there, Marchand. A lot of guys that you would want for that power play exposure, and it's paying off in that metric. And then he's, paired it with some pretty good hits and blocks D, which I would use in more of a category league format than a points league format. But he's, right in the mix right there, right in that 4-4. I believe he's 4-4 right now. So it's been working, and he's giving himself a chance to make a push for the playoffs. We're only 2 months in, so there is still a bunch of time. But next, let's take a look at another team. Let's see who's next down here. Fantasy Hockey Doctor. So quick correction, Dobber was 5-3, not 4-4. So right there tied with me. So that's to be expected considering he does have a pretty good team there. So as we're looking at Fantasy Hockey Doctor, you can see not much goal production. So the complete opposite of one of those other teams that we just saw. Really good assists, really good shots volume. Hits and blocks are really strong as well, and the power play numbers are pretty good. So overall, a pretty good offensive team right now. The goaltending is average in these categories and slightly below average, but probably good enough to make some hay in this league, try to do some damage. McKinnon is obviously his best player. That's going to be a massive player for him. Braden Point's been really offensively productive, and those outbursts of 5-point nights, those are definitely going to win you your week. He also picked up Byfield, who's playing really well on that top line in LA. Lawson Krause was probably a waiver stream. He's been playing really well. I believe Schmaltz was a waiver pickup as well. And then some really powerful power play point defensemen. So Bouchard, Quinn Hughes. Quinn Hughes has been the best defenseman in fantasy so far, so those guys are carrying the mail on the back end. Picking up Nemec for a stream this week, I would assume. Sean Walker getting some power play time, I believe on power play 2, and that might be the reason for the pickup there. He's putting up some numbers tonight. And then you also have some other guys, Jesper Bratt, John Tavares. They're getting it done. Goudreau isn't. Klingberg's on IR. I don't know if he's even coming back. And then Thomas Hertl is probably a streamer. I don't think he got drafted. He might have been. But then goaltending-wise, Kemper and UPL, that's kind of exactly what you're seeing. Mid-pack goaltending. Really good starters in general. UPL taking the starters net over in Buffalo. But Darcy Kemper has been outplayed by Charlie Lindgren. So these are guys that can get it done. They are starters, so they're going to get you some volume. And that's pretty much what I would expect to see out of those two guys is about mid-pack goaltending. And that's sometimes all you need if you have a really good offense like he does. So overall, really complete team other than the goal production, which should be there with Braden Point, Nathan McKinnon, and all that. But you are getting a lot of assists from Bouchard and Hughes and whatnot. So it is a little bit different than some of the other teams that we've seen, but overall very complete and a 53 across all the metrics. Now let's take a look at Fantasy Puck Chris, who is in second place. Now I am playing him this week, and I hope he doesn't do well, but just looking at his lineup, I think he will. Offensively, the shots are a little low. Power play and assists are a little low. The goal scoring is really nice. The hits are off the charts, 84th percentile there. Blocks are above average right there. You've got good wins and good total save volume. And he does have Jake Ottinger, who gets a ton of starts. You got Jacob Markstrom, who's been pretty good, especially lately. He's been heating up a little bit, had a little bit of a rough start. I have him in a couple leagues. And then he's also got Joseph Wall, so he is going to get you those wins and probably some total saves because Toronto is not the best defensive team and neither is Calgary, but Dallas is, so that hopefully should boost some of the other metrics here. Overall, his team is pretty stacked just looking at some of the wingers he's got. So Stützle, Jarvis, Vetrano has been red hot this year. Cole Caulfield's a goal scorer. Rantanen is always one of the top 10 players in the league or so. Mercer is probably a waiver pickup in a 4-game week for the Devils. Sider, Hedman, Provorov, Falk, those are all power play quarterbacks, although Provorov is a power play 2 quarterback and Falk kind of shares that with Torrey Krug, but he does have some really good defensemen. Mo Sider had a really great week last week. Evander Kane is a beast in fantasy. That's probably why his hits are so high. Then you've got Kevin Fiala. He's over a point per game, and that line with Moore and Deneau has been red hot lately. Trevor Moore, being the goal-scoring beneficiary of that, but Fiala's playing pretty well as well. Jake Sanderson was quarterbacking that power play early in the year, so that probably carried him through the first couple of weeks. Not necessarily carried him. He's got some good talent on this roster, but that was probably a nice thing to have in the beginning, and then Sanderson's kind of fallen off a little bit since then. And he's got Patrick Kane stashed on IR, so any day now he's going to get an even more of a boost, and that'll probably take the spot of Mercer. So he's going to have some stacked wingers on this team, and he's got some good goaltending. This is obviously a very complete team. Center-wise, I think he could he's got a very complete team, and I think he picked in the middle of the draft, if I'm not mistaken, so that is to be expected. If I'm wrong about that, you can correct me in the comments. I'm kind of blanking on what the draft order was at this point in the season. We're now 2 months in, but a very complete team, and that's what I would expect if you were drafting in the middle of the draft. I did that in one of my other leagues, and my team is very complete and has some of these same players, Caulfield, Rantanen, etc. So very well-constructed team, and I hope he sucks this week because I desperately need a win. But let's take a look at Fantasy Puck Don, who's up next. Now, full disclosure, I lost to Don, so I've lost to him and Data Driven Hockey, and then I also lost to Daily Dose last week, so those are my 3 losses on the year. He's got incredible blocks coverage here, so just looking at some of the D, Sergachev's definitely going to get that, Petrangelo's going to get that, and Jacob Trouba is leading the league in blocks, so that makes some sense. And then in terms of assists, 69th percentile there. Kempe's on a really nice streak this year. He's got Aho. DeBrincat was off to a great start. Brian Rust is about a point per game player. Owen Tippett is a little bit underwhelming thus far in the season, but he's starting to crank it up lately. And then some other guys. Zuccarello's obviously one of those assist guys. And he's got Connor McDavid, who's finally starting to wake up. So that is a terrifying prospect for the rest of us in this league, that he's been playing really well, and he's in 8th place, but he's got a lot of points that should put him up higher in the standings, and that's without McDavid doing McDavid things. So now that he's on, back to good old Connor McDavid, we're all in for a lot of havoc from this from Fantasy Puck Don's team. And then in goaltending, he's got Binnington, who's played really well this year. I don't like Binnington at all, and he's been putting me, in my place and shutting me up. Same thing with Bobrovsky, by the way. He's having a really good year as well. Sorokin is probably the guy he drafted to be his G1, and he's been a little bit underwhelming, but he's starting to find his game. He's still around a .915 save percentage. And then he's got Johansson, who's still going to be, maybe not getting the starts that he was in the beginning of the season. And the defense has been atrocious in Tampa Bay. So that is something to keep an eye out for. I owned Johansson in one of my leagues waiting for Vasilevsky to come back, and he was terrible towards the end. Every time I owned him, he was terrible. When I dropped him, he was good. So that's how it falls sometimes. But overall, I think this is similar to my team in that we could both use a little bit of an offensive boost, and the goaltending is our strong suit. And I do think that he does have really good goaltending with Binnington and Sorokin. And then once McDavid wakes up, all of these bars are going to start to increase and his offense will come alive. That's my guess just going forward. But now let's take a look at Fired Up Fantasy's team. So just off the look of it, it looks pretty balanced. So right around 50th percentile in most of these offensive metrics. And then he's got 3 metrics in goal that he's got a ton of points in, or at least his percentiles are really high: saves, shutouts, and wins. And looking at the goaltending, he's got Carter Hart, Tristan Jarry, Cam Talbot. So that is going to add up to a lot of wins, a lot of shutouts, and total saves. The total saves might be coming from some of the other guys he's picked up. Gustafson's been getting shelled. Nedeljkovic and Jarry are they're not on the worst defensive team, but they aren't the best defensive team, but they've both been playing pretty well. So he does have a number of good goaltenders. I'm assuming he's streaming Nedeljkovic for tonight, and that's not necessarily one of his keepers, but nonetheless, up front, he's got a very scary proposition here. He's got Pastrnak, he's got Nichushkin, Trocheck is playing out of his mind right now. Jack Eichel is playing really well. He's got Heiskanen and Dahlin and Carlson and Luke Hughes on the blue line. So really powerful defensive, offense from his defense, I should say. So this is looking really good in terms of his team. And that's not good news for me because I do not have that level of offense right now. So this is something that I'm going to have to address, and making a trade is probably the only thing I can do, but that's going to be even more difficult in a league like this where everybody's team is very well crafted and all of these players know what they're doing. So really good stuff from Fired Up Fantasy, which is why I believe he's in a tie for second place, if I'm not mistaken. But he did have the second most points, and you saw him on that other graph, which we can switch to real quick, and then we'll come back. Yeah, this was him right here. So really complete team, and you're seeing that with the bar graph, with the offense and the goaltending both kind of in the same spot. Josh's team for Apples and Ginos, you see this amazing shot coverage, so 84th percentile there. All the other offensive metrics are low, and I know what that feels like for sure, but the goaltending has been really solid. He's got Connor Ingram, Sergei Bobrovsky, and Ville Husso. Husso has been losing some starts to Alex Lyon and James Reimer a little bit, but the other two have been really good, and Connor Ingram is one of the top 5 goalies on my goalie hub, so Bobrovsky's in the top 10 as well. So this is why his team is having some success. And the goaltending is one of the things that I've noticed that is, that's the only way that I can win right now. And it does definitely help with the weighting in this league. I don't have it off the top of my head. Maybe I can come back to it in a little bit. But the goaltending has been solid for Josh. On top of that, he's got Kaprizov, who hasn't necessarily woken up yet. He's got Tuck, Lehkonen, and Ricard Raquel on IR, so that might be hindering his offense, just not having those guys in the lineup. John Carlson hasn't gotten underway yet in terms of his offensive production. Ovechkin is probably the main cause of that. That power play has not worked yet, so that is a concern, and I own John Carlson in a number of leagues. And then speaking of, the guys on the Senators, Jacob Chychrun, this is another one of those guys that hasn't necessarily played that well lately. He started a little bit hot. He's one of those shot volume guys, which explains this shot number being so high. A number of these guys shoot the puck. Cam Atkinson's a shooter. Stamkos is a shooter. Wyatt Johnston, Rope Hintz shoot the puck a little bit. So a number of guys all in that same kind of, mold. But on top of that, you're looking at a number of guys that I'm thinking he's streaming right now. Bjorkstrand with a decent week this week. Atkinson is probably one of those guys as well, trying to get a lot of volume out of that. And it seems to be working. So they're putting up points tonight, and that is definitely helping him. But now let's move it on to the next team. I don't want to spend too much time. We're getting into the weeds here. This is Fantasy Tips team, a.k.a. Mr. Klutch. There are 2 fantasy tip guys. I'm not sure which one this is, but they both know what they're doing. So the offensive production is there. So 61st percentile in goals and assists. The power play numbers are really strong. The hits and blocks are a little bit low, and that's to be expected. You focus on 1 or 2 of these categories or 3 of these categories, and you kind of let the others go just based on the weighting in the league. So looking at his roster, Zibanejad is going to get you power play points. Ovechkin should, but hasn't. Kucherov has been dominant in the power play production numbers, so that definitely explains that. And he's got William Nylander. Nugent Hopkins hasn't necessarily popped off yet, but he's a power play guy, so that does explain the power play percentile numbers. Then in terms of goaltending, he's got wins and total save volume. That's mainly coming from Samsonov and Vanacek, I guess. Vasilevsky's just gotten back into the net, so if they can kind of insulate him and protect him a little bit better, they've had terrible defense so far. If they can do that, he'll get even more wins and probably a couple shutouts from Vasilevsky. So that is a scary proposition, considering that's the only thing he's lacking in terms of goaltending is goals against and shutouts. So overall, he's not necessarily as complete of a team. You're looking more at dominating certain categories and having that carry you, and it is working for him. So this does seem to be a kind of a different construction than what we've seen from some of the teams, and that's really encouraging to see that all these teams have different composition. They're all focused on different metrics, but it seems to be working because everybody's kind of in the same vein. Nobody's lower than 2 and 6. Nobody's higher than 5 and 3. So it is a very competitive league for that reason, and we're seeing it with these bar graphs. Now let's go to Nate's team. So this is a team that we saw, if I can go back over here, this was this team with the really good offense and the really bad goaltending. And I don't want to say it's really bad before we look at it, but just looking at it now, Fleury and Merzlikins, that does explain a lot. Somehow his goals against is pretty decent, and I would assume he had been streaming other guys in addition to these guys. Merzlikins hasn't been bad lately, so that might have actually boosted his numbers a little bit. And then he is getting some wins out of those guys. I would assume he's been streaming some other guys on top of that, because Fleury hasn't been starting, and I owned him for a little bit. He was a little bit underwhelming until the coaching changed, so hopefully that's been turned around. But the offensive numbers are not bad either. He's focused on goals and power play points and blocks. So looking at the block numbers, he's got Chris Letang. That's going to be a shot blocker. Matheson's a very complete defenseman. You also have Werenski for some shot volume, although his shots are pretty low. Actually, I'm sorry. We're looking at the wrong team. That's my bad, because when I've switched back over, it did not load this back up. So completely different picture. This looks more like what we're expecting. So goals are very high, shots are very high, which a lot of these guys I can just tell right now. Austin Matthews is a shooter, Werenski's a shooter, Letang shoots, you got Matheson, you got a lot of these guys that are shooting the puck. The goal scoring should be there, and it is. Philip Forsberg's having a crazy year. He's been getting it done. He also has a bunch of complete players like Matheson, like Boone Jenner. So really interesting roster construction in that he's got those top-end elite guys in Matthews and Forsberg and all those other names that we just went over. JT Miller's on this team, so that's a scary prospect, and that's why his offense is so elite level. He hit on all of those top picks, probably found Forsberg really late in the draft, and that's been paying off for him. And then the goaltending is the only thing keeping him down. The total save volume is probably, again, from Merzlikins being the starter in Columbus and having a terrible defense in front of him, so that is helpful. And then if they can get Minnesota back on the right track, and Fleury can get a couple starts in there, stream a goalie here and there, that is still a team that can come back from the dead. They've been improving. They're on a 3-game win streak, so that would definitely help boost the goaltending, but I don't even know if he needs goaltending with this offense. This is one of the reasons. So if we look back at the standings, he's number one in terms of total points, I believe, if I'm looking at it right, 32-11, but he's 6th place because of the fact of, the matchups. It's if this was a Roto league, he would obviously be number one, but yeah, incredible offensive team. If he can get some goaltending streams in there to boost his numbers, that's a very scary team to look at. And last but not least, the Injury Ninjas, the team that we were just looking at that I thought was Nate's team from Apples and Ginos. This team is, their goaltending is much better than what we were just looking at in terms of just the players on the roster. Shesterkin should be better. Saros should be better. He's been a little bit inconsistent this year, and Gibson was really hot early in the year. So guys that have been hot at different times of the season, Gibson was hot early. Shesterkin's pretty consistent, but hasn't necessarily been old Shesterkin where he's a .935 goaltender yet. And Saros can be that same type of goaltender as well. So if these guys all put it together at the same time, that's going to be a very difficult matchup in the playoffs, or in whatever kind of matchup you're in if you face this player on any given week. Now, in terms of offense, you're looking for goals, power play points, and blocks from this team, and you're going to get a lot of that. So Larson's a shot blocker, Slavin's a shot blocker, Hronek getting some power play points. I think he gets some blocks as well. Devon Taves does as well. And then for offense, Draisaitl hasn't really woken up to his normal levels yet, but he is a 50-60 goal scorer, so that's going to explain some goal coverage there. Nico Hischier was injured for a chunk of time there. You're looking at Jeff Skinner without Tage Thompson, so that should come up. His numbers should increase when Tage Thompson gets healthy. Dylan Larkin was off to an incredible start. Timo Meier hasn't gotten going yet, so there are some dormant players on this team, as we saw with a couple of these teams in this league, where you're waiting on guys to get healthy or waiting on guys to start popping off, and now they're starting to. So Draisaitl started to get it going in the last week or so. That's a scary prospect, but all in all, you can see with these bar graphs and with this scatter plot over here, these teams are all constructed differently, and that's going to make a difference in terms of philosophy, but it's not really making a difference in terms of the standings, as nobody's higher than 5-3, nobody's lower than 2-6. So this is really interesting and very competitive, which is making it very difficult to separate from the pack. So that's what you would expect out of people who dedicate a lot of time and energy into putting out fantasy content on whatever platform they're putting it out. But that's going to do it for this video. Thank you guys for watching. Hopefully this gave you enough insight into what's going on in the Fantasy Puck Creators League. And let's root for me this week because I desperately need a win, right? But thank you for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.